rugged shores and woodlands of the north, its history of copper mines and iron ore, the Great Lakes fishery. To the farmlands of the southern counties we'll look around, my friend, and all that waits the sportsman in the state of Michigan. And sometimes when the moon brings out the diamonds in the snow, and the stillness of the forest lies encased in Arctic cold, the wind might whisper through the trees, listen if you can, it tells you all their beauty in the state of Michigan.
Can you believe it? There's only 2 days left in July. Hi there, come on in. It is Thursday, July 29th, 2004. We have some really interesting segments to show you from the July 29th, 1982 show. Fred cooked up a somewhat unpopular fish. He served it to charter captains and they thought it was something exotic. Glenn Dutterer introduces us to Michigan's only poisonous snake. We also learn how deer keep from sweating in hot weather. And we have a story on fish behavior that's not all that difficult to swallow. All this and more coming up in the next half hour, so stay tuned. I'm Zachary Trost with a show for the practical sportsman.
Steve Lang from Cedar Springs has been following our stories on Len Stutman's campaign to make the Kirtland's warbler Michigan state bird. And he writes, I remember a quiz I took in my senior year of high school that included the question, what is the state bird of Michigan? Every person answered robin, except the exchange student who answered Kirtland's warbler. Now this was the 1979-1980 school year. Maybe I could get my grade changed if you would help me prove that we were not wrong on that quiz. Keep the outdoors fun for all. Well, thanks, Steve, but the bad news is nobody was right in your high school class because Michigan did not officially have a state bird since 1933. As Len Stutman told us 2 weeks ago, the legislature passed a resolution making the robin the state bird in 1931, but legislative resolutions only last 2 years. So after 1933, the resolution expired, a statute was never passed, and Michigan had no official state bird. Now, it would be easy for the legislature to pass a statute today making the Kirtland's warbler the state bird because we really don't have one, according to the law. Chad Dwyer from North Adams asks, is there an official scoring method for ring-necked pheasants? If so, is there a website or publication that would have a list of trophies for Michigan? We love your show. You and your staff do a fantastic job of keeping us informed each week. We try to, Chad, but a little short on information on this one. But I can tell you that back when I worked for Mort Neff on his original Michigan Outdoor Series, I remember hunters sometimes counted the bars on the tails of rooster pheasants. Now, the theory was that older birds are bigger, they have longer tails, and those tails have more bars. Now, I don't think the tail length has any particular significance, but it's kind of fun to compare the tails of pheasants. Now, as far as finding information, I suggest the Pheasants Forever website, seeing if they know of anybody who keeps records on big pheasants. My opinion is that if a hunter bags the 2-bird limit of wild roosters in one day in Michigan, that should qualify for a modern-day record book recording or something, no matter how long the tail is.
This week we added 2 classic shows from July 29th to our PSF partner website. In the 1982 program, Fred played a trick on a group of charter captains by preparing a recipe with freshwater drum, also known as sheep's head, a fish that's commonly caught in Lake St. Clair but often tossed back as being inedible.
Speaking of fish that have a tough road to hoe in life, these little fish right here, freshwater drum, have a particularly rough time. They're abundant in Lake St. Clair, but most anglers won't even consider keeping them in the boat. They throw them out. They think they're trash fish, bad eating. Well, I learned a recipe last weekend where you take the fillets and you can cook them up and serve them in a way that if they're with cocktail sauce or butter, wow, you won't believe it. But I had to con these charter boat captains into trying it. Watch what happened.
The sheep's head fillets were boiled like you do with shrimp or lobster and served the same way.
Delicious. It is delicious? Dan?
Excellent.
It is? What did you dip it in? Oh, you
Butter.
put lemon on it. And dipped it in the butter.
Great.
Okay, now,
I put it in the sauce. It's great.
what does it taste like? Shrimp, or-
I think it's pickerel.
Nick, you've dug into it. What have you tried it in, the butter or the cocktail sauce?
I did a little bit of both, Fred.
It's excellent.
Tastes a little bit like lobster. Tastes like lobster. No kidding.
A little like shrimp.
A little like shrimp. What about you, Roy?
I think it's fish.
You think it's fish? I'm going to tell you guys what it is, okay? It's sheep's head. That's what it is.
I'll tell you one thing, Fred. The heck if I'll be throwing my sheep head away.
That's why I was saving them.
Right.
That's why I always save them out on the trip.
This 1982 show changed a lot of anglers' attitudes about the food value of sheep's head. In the 1980s, we had a weekly segment called the Trophy Report, which later became the Trophy Book, and now it's evolved into the Fish and Game Hall of Fame. Here's one of the formats Fred used for that segment from July 29th, 1982.
Our Sunday trip was trolling on Lake St. Clair with Captain Bob Pichet. Now, Bob, you remember, is the worm man. He raises and stores night crawlers for fishing, keeping them on the boat in a small styrofoam container filled with worms and ice. That's right, ice keeps the crawlers fresh, firm, and alive. Bob uses crawlers on harnesses, and he puts them on flatfish, hooking them on 2 of the 3 hooks. But it works, and Mark Waters hauled in his share of walleye and some perch, along with Jim, who said he'd never caught so many fish before. Nearly all of them were legal size, and we ended with a limit for Mark and Jim. In fact, one walleye went about 5 pounds, so they were happy. Also, Bob and Joanna Pichet, like our bass fishing friends the day before, were super hosts, and I think all of them should be named our Michigan Outdoors Trophy Anglers of the Week. There's no doubt about it. Little Buzz you here is a rattlesnake. Glenn Dutterer, Wildlife Extension man from Michigan State here at the Cooperative Extension Service. You bring the strangest things to Michigan Outdoors. Tell us about this. Is it a strange creature in Michigan?
Well, an uncommon creature in Michigan, a Massasauga rattlesnake, and it occurs in habitat like you see behind us, prairie.
Like here, marshes?
Marsh, right, marsh or swamp. Another name for it is the prairie marsh rattlesnake. And so in these habitats, it can be fairly common, but because these habitats aren't abundant, that means that the snake is fairly uncommon in Michigan, but I wouldn't call it rare.
Well, you would call it poisonous, though.
Oh, yes, definitely. It's a member of the rattlesnake family. Obvious because of those rattles that you see on its tail. And the number of rattles don't indicate the age or anything, just the number of times it shed its skin and hadn't broke off. But no other snake except the rattlesnake has rattles, and this is the only poisonous snake that occurs in Michigan.
Okay, so the only one that anybody has to worry about is this.
On our early shows, Glenn Dutterer, who was a Michigan State University wildlife extension specialist, he pioneered the way for the crocodile hunter. 11 years later, on the Practical Sportsman program of July 29th, Fred did the outdoor headlines followed by a commentary on terrorism.
Finally, a so-called animal rights activist, a rich California kid who says the MSU mink were political prisoners, has been indicted for bombing the MSU Mink Research Facility in 1992. PETA supporters have been linked as well, and more arrests are expected. I find the press coverage on this animal rights stuff really irritating. 2 weeks ago, Sunday's Detroit News headlines read, "Animal activist accused in bombing." Say what? I don't recall any headlines saying Iranian activist accused in bombing. I mean, people who bomb are generally called terrorists. But apparently the liberal press in America makes an exception for those animal rights wackos. Now, the Detroit News...
Some people say that Fred should have moved to Fox News, but we like it right here on public television. It was a hot summer in 1993, which led to this feature on how deer cope with the summer heat.
You know, I know we feel mighty hot in this weather. The deer feel hot too, but their summer coats are made of very thin hair that has no particular insulating value. The way deer stay cool is not by sweating like we do. They don't have the same kind of sweat glands like humans. Probably has something to do with survival. Sweating puts out a lot of scent. So instead of perspiring, deer breathe through their mouths at a faster rate than normal, sort of panting. And the cooler air goes into their lungs. Their body heat is carried by blood vessels in their lungs, which transfers that body heat to the air in their lungs, and they breathe that warm air out. sort of like an air exchange cooling system. So when you see a deer panting with its mouth open on a hot day, it's doing the same thing a dog is doing by panting. It's cooling itself off. And it does this instead of sweating.
From a story on summer heat on July 29, 1993, we cooled down underwater where we studied the characteristics of some common Michigan sport fish.
Now here's a panfish with blue markings on the cheek. It's a green sunfish, longer body and head than the common bluegill right here. I want you to notice how small the mouth on a bluegill is compared to the larger mouth of, oh, say, the catfish. What kind of catfish is this? That's a bullhead. You can tell by the rounded tail. Bullheads gobble worms and can be caught easily because they have such big mouths. And so does a channel catfish. Now I know this is a channel cat because of the fork in its tail. Here's a yellow perch. Now watch how it swims with its dorsal fin down, puts it up to stabilize when it stops. When it starts to swim, puts it back down. Perch are easier to catch on big worms and on minnows because a perch's mouth is noticeably larger than a bluegill's. The size of a fish's mouth makes a big difference on how you catch them. This fish is common to probably most lakes in Michigan and throughout the country for that matter. It's a gar, sometimes called a gar pike because of its shape, but it has a prehistoric bony bill that's full of teeth. Gar frequently steal bait from anglers, but they're nearly impossible to catch on hook and line because there's nothing soft to hook. Rock bass, on the other hand, are easy to catch because they have soft mouths, easy to hook, and their mouths are larger than a bluegill, and they can easily gobble down a whole night crawler. The walleye and even bigger mouth crawler harnesses are a favorite bait, but in the aquarium, walleye don't like those bright camera lights. They do hug the bottom, just like you find them most of the time in most inland lakes.
This feature illustrates that fish don't really bite their food like we say they do. They suck it in rather gently. Knowing how fish eat can help you detect a bite and when to set that hook.
Dennis Doria from Hopkins, that's farming area.
Yep, sure is.
You a farmer?
My dad is, and I help him a lot.
And that's how you got permission to
Hunt there, yeah.
hunt there, yeah. And this is a 12-pointer down in Allegan County. Got this on the 18th of November, 1:40 p.m. That, you know, what, this is like on a Tuesday or something?
Monday.
Monday? Afternoon.
And afternoon. I was helping my father pick corn.
Okay, this isn't going to be from, but you jumped off of the corn? Okay.
No. I crawled on my hands and knees. I seen him chasing a doe coming into the corn and didn't have my gun with me, but it was up to the farm. So I grabbed it and started running across the cornfield. Then I got half down on my knees and the doe was looking at me. He was chasing a doe. And I ended up getting on my hands and knees, throwing my gun over my shoulder and crawling in the mud for about 200 yards. Then I sat in the corn waiting for him, and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. I called my wife on the cell phone and says, "Are you going hunting tonight, honey?" And she says, "Yes." And I says, "Well, you better hunt out here if I don't shoot this buck." And about that time I says, "I gotta go, here he comes." I hung up the cell phone. He came running at me. I shot him. He fell down. He got back up. Shot him again, and he fell down in the corn. So I went running down the corn after him. He came back out of the corn, charging me. And he fell that quick.
Yeah, but you know why all this came about, I hope.
Yeah, because I was a good son helping my dad.
No. You know what it looks like to a big buck to see you on your hands and knees?
Stupid.
No, I wasn't thinking that. Have you know about decoys and things?
Yeah? Do you think I was a doe? I hope not.
It's possible.
I won't do that again then.
Just make sure you're not crawling in your hands and knees without your gun.
Okay, but it was worth it.
But you know, this could lead into a whole new technique. The old hands and knees thing. Hey, decoys work.
That's right.
Have a live one there. you could rig up a little deal where you could push a button and you'd have a tail that would wag?
Or his ears.
Somebody will be
Hey,
working on that.
We might mass patent that, Fred.
You might. But look at what you got.
It was worth it.
Man alive, this is a bruiser and a heavy rack. Those southern Michigan racks are oftentimes really white like this, bleached out.
And he was running this summer in my backyard with 2 more of that size.
That's something else. Well, Dennis Doria, you want to demonstrate how you do that on the hands and knees?
That's okay.
That's okay, all right. Very good, Dennis. Well, you live in a pretty part of the state.
Yes, sir.
Les McFarland from Alanson. And he went over to Lake Huron, Sheboygan, trolling for, I don't know what you were trolling for at that time of year, but you caught a steelhead that's over 18 pounds.
Yeah, we were fishing salmon. We were in a Rogers City salmon tournament.
Ah, Rogers City.
We were running out of Rogers City. We were fishing up by Boys Blank Island.
Ah, that's, I've been there a few times. Boys Blank fished around there, got lake trout around the backside.
Yeah, we were on the backside. We were out by the lighthouse.
What were you trolling with?
We were using Stinger lures.
I see, you got the Stinger Pro Team, the Stinger up there.
Yep.
You got
Nothing
a big
but the
smile on that.
best.
Now, how much stock of Stinger do you own?
Oh, not that much. They do a lot of sponsoring for me though.
Ah,
So we do a lot of tournament fishing.
and did this one win the tournament?
Nope, they didn't have a steelhead division in the tournament.
Wow, what's that all about?
It
Did it?
didn't matter.
Well, that's a beautiful fish. Did it jump?
No, it didn't really come out of the water that much. We were out in 200 feet of water, and we got it about 50 feet down, and it was fun. But he didn't come out like they do in the springtime.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun.
So do you fish mainly the salmon tournaments?
Yep. Yeah, we do probably 10 or 12 a year.
All up in the northern part?
Or the east side of the state. Mostly Lake Huron. We're going to the Blue Water Classic here in May.
I've been on that Blue Water Classic a couple times. It can be kind of slow.
Yeah,
in the
they
spring.
get smaller salmon that time of year, but money still don't matter.
Oh, that's why you fish.
Yeah,
It's
I like to fish too,
but it's a money-making thing.
it's competition.
But what does it cost to enter a tournament?
Oh, you're looking, usually the entry fees are somewhere around $350. Then you got all your tackle and gear.
So last year, did you come out ahead?
No, you don't come out ahead. It's not a money maker. You got to have a good job too.
I see. Well, that's the way fishing is.
Yep.
Les McFarland, hey, good talking with you. Big steelhead from Alanson. In the meantime, be sure you take advantage of this last weekend in July and take a kid fishing or get outdoors and do something. It's a great place to be. See you next week.
It's a member of the rattlesnake family, obvious because of those rattles that you see on its tail. And the number of rattles don't indicate the age or anything, just the number of times it shed its skin and hadn't broke off. But no other snake except the rattlesnake has rattles, and this is the only poisonous snake that occurs in Michigan.
Okay, so the only one